Most people are comparing Iansan to Bennett. Now that's a high podium to put Iansan on because many of us know the sheer dominance of Bennett in Genshin's team building. He's got a useful attack buff, healing, great pyro energy generation, and he's really easy to build. But what if I told you Iansan also has a useful attack buff, healing, great electro energy generation, and is also really easy to build? That might sound like just a copy and paste of Bennett's kit, but trust me, it's not. Let me show you how Iansan's kit works and how she can be both a Bennett replacement for certain teams and work well in tandem with Bennett in other teams. To support her teammates, Iansan's best combo at C0 before switching out is skill, tap a normal attack once, and then burst. So let's start with her skill first. Iansan's skill has her dash through an enemy and generates 54 Night Soul points for her special Notland stamina bar. Within 5 seconds of using this skill, you can also press normal attack to have Iansan do a quick stomp on the ground that increases her attack by 20% and grants extra Night Soul point regeneration from the effects of her burst, amplified if the character is a Notland character that also consumes Night Soul points. Both of those benefits are super important for Iansan's burst. After casting your skill and triggering Iansan's special stomp, press your elemental burst to unleash a much larger AoE stomp, restore 15 Night Soul points, and grant an attack buff to the active character. This is where things get a little bit complicated because unlike Bennett, Iansan's attack buff is not just a simple flat attack buff and instead varies based on her Night Soul point situation. If Iansan's Night Soul points are at 42 or above, basically when her Notland stamina bar is about 80% filled or higher, her attack buff is purely based on her total attack. If Iansan's Night Soul points are below that 42 point threshold, the attack scaling that calculates the buff gets weaker and weaker as she loses Night Soul points from her Notland stamina bar. Iansan consumes 6 Night Soul points per second, meaning you'll be losing out on the effectiveness of her attack buff pretty quickly. That is, unless your character likes to move it like King Julian from Madagascar. You see, moving around with your active character will proportionately restore Night Soul points to Iansan at a ratio of 2/3 of the distance traveled. While distance is measured in meters in Genshin and a full dash is about 6 meters long, to most players it's pretty much a non-existent mechanic, so all you really need to know is that distance counts both the movement on the ground and movement from jumping up and down. In general, most characters can move around a little bit while they're on field and dash around to dodge, meaning you'll at least regenerate some Night Soul points and slow down the decay of Iansan's attack buff. That in itself is enough to make Iansan a pretty good attack buffer for most characters in the Genshin cast. However, the ones that perform the best with Iansan typically take advantage of the abundance of movement that comes with plunge attacks or natural movement in their kits. For talent priority, leveling Iansan's burst is the most important talent to focus on in order to increase the max cap for her attack buff, while both of her skill and normal attack talents can be left unleveled if you need to save some resources. One last thing to note about Iansan's kit is that she does have some healing in her kit. Iansan's Ascension 4 passive heals the active character based on 60% of Iansan's attack whenever she recovers Night Soul points from your active character moving around, but this can only happen once every 2.8 seconds. Even though you'll see in the artifact and weapon sections that attack percent is a huge focus for Iansan's build, 60% attack is just a really low scaling for a heal, which means Bennett is a much better healer than Iansan in practice. What pushes Iansan from pretty good with small heals and a fairly large attack buff into a top tier buffer is her status as a Notland character. Unlocking the full potential of the 4-set scroll of the Hero of Cinder City's 40% damage bonus buff is insane when combined with her large attack buff. The 4-set Noblesse Oblige is an alternative to the 4-set scroll if you're already using the scroll artifact set on one of Iansan's teammates like Sitlali, Shilonin, and Ororon, since the artifact set does not stack. However, for most players, it's okay to save your resources and just keep Iansan on the 4-set scroll regardless of whether or not your team already has it, because it can be expensive to farm 2 full artifact builds for just one character. For artifact stats, your standard build will be triple attack percent in the Sands, Goblet, and Circlet. The sands can be replaced with ER% if your team has low energy generation, and the circlet can be replaced with crit rate if you're using Favonius Lance. Substat focus is purely just attack percent, flat attack, and energy recharge with crit rate for Fav Lance builds. Typically, Iansan will not need much energy recharge via her artifacts. In most teams, 150 to 160% total energy recharge is more than enough for Iansan to burst every rotation. This is because her skill generates 4 electro energy particles, she has a lot of energy refund between the 2-set scroll and her C1, and most of her common weapons usually have an energy recharge main stat that's around 30 to 40%. Those common weapons with energy recharge are Favonius Lance and the event weapon from patch 5.4, Tamayuratei no Ohanashi. Not only are both of these weapons completely free to play, they also have a high 565 base attack and a modest 30.6% energy recharge stat, which is perfect for Iansan who built a lot of attack percent to put that high base attack to good use. Favonius Lance is typically the best weapon on Iansan since it can help solve her teammates' energy problems as well, but don't sleep on Tamayuratei no Ohanashi either. A 40% attack buff via the Spear's passive can help curb the drop-off from Iansan's decaying attack buff. Because even though you only need a little less than 2,600 attack to cap her attack buff at talent level 10 when above 42 Night Soul points, that extra 40% attack from Tamayuratei's passive can push a normal Iansan build well past 3,000 attack and thus compensate for the much lower conversion numbers for Iansan's attack buff when below 42 Night Soul points. If you're looking to stop Iansan's attack buff from falling off as much, look no further than a 4-star polearm like Prospector's Drill with lots of attack percent and a synergistic passive for Iansan, or 5-star polearms like Scoured Spine, Calamity Queller, Vortex Vanquisher, and Engulfing Lightning. Thanks to Iansan's lack of pickiness when it comes to stats, it's hard to choose wrong when it comes to Iansan's weapons. As for Iansan's team building, she's both extremely flexible and very close to being best in slot for several characters. For characters that don't move around a lot and fail to restore significant Night Soul points back to Iansan, Iansan is typically a decent support for the most part that you can't go wrong with as a DPS floor raiser. For characters that do move around a lot, Iansan becomes part of their best teams, and that's precisely why Iansan is such a strong 4-star support. Not only can she be an easy to slot in floor raiser for characters who aren't super synergistic with her kit, she's also one of the best ceiling raisers for characters who do synergize with her kit, especially once you get your hands on her Constellations. C2, C5, and C6 are great for pushing Iansan's buffing power to higher levels, while C1 is a nice energy refund and C4 gives her slightly better Night Soul point generation for less decay on her attack buff. This video will primarily focus on the units that have high synergy with Iansan, and who better to talk about than Mavuika, who seems to have set some power creep concerns ablaze. Well, what if I told you that C0 Iansan is almost as good as Xilonen, and once you get your hands on most of her constellations, Iansan can even pass up Xilonen in Mavuika teams with Seat Lolly. That's mainly because Reshred stacking with both Seat Lolly and Xilonen gives much worse returns than attack buff stacking with Bennett and Iansan, due to the fact that shredding an enemy's resistance into the negatives reduces the percent Reshred and thus its effectiveness is lowered. And not to mention that Mavuika spinning around on her bike with charge attacks counts as a ton of movement for Iansan's burst. This makes her one of the only characters that can regenerate more Night Soul points for Iansan than the 6 points per second that Iansan consumes. While all that synergy is great, without Seat Lolly, players may still prefer Xilonen over Iansan because her Reshred becomes much more valuable, and her Night Soul point consumption is quick enough to easily guarantee 100% uptime on Mavuika's burst. However, your best theoretical Mavuika team is now Iansan, Mavuika, Bennett, and Seat Lolly, and now Iansan even allows you to run a full 4-star support setup with Mavuika by replacing Seat Lolly with Rosaria. These teams can be great for those who don't have Xilonen, or if you do have Xilonen but want to use her in your other teams aside from Mavuika Melt. To no one's surprise, the limited 5-star character that releases in the same patch as our 4-star support Iansan is one of the best pairings. There's not much to say here except Varesa is an attack scaling plunge attack DPS thanks to the effects of her burst, and Iansan perfectly fits in both of Varesa's main archetypes. mainly thanks to Iansan's good electro energy generation, the two creating the electro resonance, and Varesa's plunging allows for great Night Soul point regeneration for Iansan's attack buff. The two standard archetypes that you'd play with Varesa are either Chevreuse Overload teams or the classic Farina and Shenyun pairing that works well with pretty much every single plunge DPS. Final slot options in the Chevreuse Overload team has to be an off-field pyro applicator like Mavuika, Xiangling, Power Traveler, or Deha. Some might actually be glad to hear that Varesa is one of the few characters that actually prefer Iansan over Bennett rather than using the two in tandem. Staying with the theme of plunge attacks, Gaming is another great pairing for Iansan's incentive to move around with your active character. Not only is Gaming moving up and down with plunge attacks, he's also moving back and forth with the dashes towards Montai between each plunge attack as well. That kind of movement for maximizing Iansan's attack buff is pretty much unmatched aside from Mavuika's motorcycle donuts. If you're sick and tired of using Bennett with Gaming because you hate being confined to that burst circle, Iansan can be a great Bennett replacement, but it is still highly recommended to run a second pyro character for energy purposes. The best example of where that fits is with Chevreuse Overload teams, where after the trio of Iansan, Gaming, and Chevreuse, you only have space to pick an off-field electro applicator for the final slot between units like Fischl, Orodon, or Yai Miko. While these teams can see success, using both Bennett and Iansan together gives Gaming a much higher DPS ceiling, especially if you use reaction enabling supports like Citlali or Farina in the final slot. In fact, Iansan, Gaming, Bennett, and Rosaria may actually be the highest DPS 4-star only team if we're looking at 4-star teams that have access to C6s. Kinich is one of my personal favorite characters to play right now, and I'm quite glad that Iansan adds another option to his somewhat restrictive team building. These two work well together mainly because Kinich is a pretty mobile character that provides better returns from Iansan's attack buff, and Iansan doesn't have any off-field electro application that can mess with your burning uptime. Your typical Kinich setup usually has Kinich, Bennett, Emily, and a pyro applicator like Mavuika, Xiangling, Toma, Deha, or Pyro Traveler. If you wanted to replace Bennett with Iansan just because you're tired of using Bennett, you most definitely can. However, not many people have Emily and sometimes struggle to figure out who can actually fit in her slot instead. Luckily for you, Iansan is also a great replacement for Emily even when only considering her attack buff and disregarding the 4-set scroll. This is because there will be cases where the burning reaction will prevent you from reacting Electro and Dendro together to buff Kinich's Dendro damage. One surprising character to talk about with synergy with Iansan is Chasca. Chasca's status as a Notlin character allows Iansan to get great value out of her Night Soul Regeneration Ascension passive, and Chasca's ability to move around while charging her bullets is surprisingly alright for slowing down the decay on Iansan's attack buff. Just like Kinich teams, you can run Chasca team variations where Iansan replaces Bennett and variations where both are used together. Your highest DPS team with the Iansan Chasca pairing will usually use Bennett and then either Farina or Citlali in the final slot. But if you're just tired of Bennett's circle impact, you can also replace him with a different pyro character like Mavuika, Deha, C0 Iansan, etc. This will ensure that Chasca still has access to the pyro element to get some melt or vaporize reactions. Last but not least, I want to talk about Clorinde. While Iansan may not be the absolute best support for Clorinde, and Clorinde may not move around nearly enough to make Iansan gain more Night Soul points than she loses, the synergy is still there. Where Iansan shines the most in Clorinde teams is the Chevreuse Overload archetype. A team like Iansan, Clorinde, Chevreuse, and then a pyro applicator like Toma, Deha, Mavuika, Xiangling, or Pyro Traveler can perform a bit better compared to using an off-field electro DPS in place of Iansan. However, for Clorinde's aggravate teams, Fischl is always going to be better than Iansan due to Fischl's insane performance with the aggravate reaction, so stick to overload teams when pairing Clorinde and Iansan together. Now before we end the video, some people might be wondering why I didn't mention Xiao. By all means, these two actually do have synergy, but the main reasons why the pairing isn't as groundbreaking compared to other plunge attack carries is because Iansan can't buff Anemo damage with the 4-set scroll, and it's hard to replace Xiao's current best teammates. C6 Varesa and Shenyun are irreplaceable supports for Xiao currently, meaning you're most often going to replace that Farina or Bennett slot. When replacing Farina or Bennett, Iansan typically is a side grade for Xiao when we subtract out that extra support from the 4-set scroll, so hopefully anyone who wants to play Xiao and Iansan together understand that. But with that, I hope you guys enjoyed this Iansan guide, and most importantly, I hope this guide was helpful for building the perfect Iansan for your account. Other than that, it's the same as always. I'll see y'all in the next one. Peace.